Another thing I want to talk about with this invasion, this Russian invasion of Ukraine, is the response from the West. And I think it has been terrible. And I'm honestly, me, I'm there. No, I am naive. I am naive for thinking that with the threat of nuclear war and a nuclear annihilation, that at least the anti-establishment people, at least the anti-imperialists and the anti-war faction could be all in agreement that we shouldn't do anything that would inflame the situation, that would escalate tension, and we should be like in unison, uh, uh, providing a counter and uh, 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 promoting a diplomatic end to this war. But that hasn't happened, and of course, I'd expect the mainstream media to be beating the war drums because that's what they're there to do. Of course, the military industrial complex, the generals, the warmongers at the State Department and the Pentagon, I'd expect them to want to inflame the situation. But like I said, it's really frustrating, and it caught me off guard how many people who nominally claim they're on the left and claim to oppose war are advocating for warlike responses to a nuclear armed power. And again, maybe I shouldn't be surprised, and I am naive because it is the same group of people when ever there's a major issue end up siding with the political establishment. Um, but this is a their response to this invasion by Russia. It's not just stupid; it's stupid and dangerous because as it is, there isn't much of an anti-war coalition here in the United States. But what there is of it, like I said, should be in agreement that we should be doing everything we can to oppose escalation in this situation. But there's a huge chunk of people doing the exact opposite. So my position here is, especially if you watch my video, my previous video on how this war was provoked by the US and NATO. My position on all of this is we shouldn't be involved at all. We shouldn't get involved at all. We should not be involved in any type of uh, response to Russia's invasion because we're just going to escalate the situation and we're going to get into a tit for tat with a nuclear armed country. And when nuclear armed countries are on opposite sides of a war, nobody wins that war because whenever anybody feels like they're losing, if Russia feels like they're losing or Putin feels like he's losing and there's no coming back, he always has a nuclear arsenal that's unmatched by any other country except for the United States. So it raises the likelihood of a nuclear weapon being used, an entire city being wiped out, and that is a very generous and interpretation of what would happen if a nuclear weapon would go off. It wouldn't just be a city, because if one nuclear bomb goes off, they all go off because you don't know where it's going to end. So the reason why there hasn't been a nuke used since the end of World War II is because now that other countries have the weaponry, it's kind of understood. Okay, you, especially if you're on opposing sides, if you use a nuke anywhere, we're gonna fire one back, and either hit one of your allies or hit the U.S. directly. And so, any situation where we're talking about war with a nuclear armed country like Russia, should the only reasonable position to take is de-escalation. But I'm seeing people so swept up in the propaganda, the blame Putin propaganda, and this was unprovoked, this is all Putin's fault and all that stuff. That they're like, of course we have to respond, we have to do something, right? We can't just let this aggression go unchecked. We can't just have people invade and occupy countries around the world and then not respond to it. And I mean, I guess before I even get into the why I think the sanctions and arming Ukraine is a terrible idea, let me just get into that hypocrisy for a little bit. And I swear to God, I have to do a whole other video about this because the hypocrisy here around all of this is too much to bear. So people here that live in the United States, right? The country that invaded Iraq, destroyed the entire country, destabilized the entire region, and from that came ISIS. Invaded Iraq, occupied Iraq, invaded, occupied Syria, invaded, occupied Libya, and destabilized Libya. Currently aiding in a genocide in Yemen, right? The country that violates international law and violates sovereignty more than anybody else on the planet, right? So there are people that live in the United States right now and are making the case, leftists too, leftists, this is what pisses me off more than anything. Leftist people who consider themselves anti-war are making the case that somebody else violating international law is so egregious that we need to sanction them. We need to put sanctions on them. I think that's ridiculous. I think, first of all, again, just the hypocrisy. If you're so principled on this, I've never heard you call for sanctions on the U.S. for any of our occupations. Now, you might be against them. You say, hey, maybe stop those sanctions, stop those occupations, get out of Iraq, get out of Afghanistan, get out of Syria. You might say those things. But you will never turn around and say the U.S. deserves sanctions, because sanctions is economic warfare that always impacts the poor and regular working class people that have absolutely nothing to do with the actions of their government. That's what sanctions do every single time. And it's not a mistake. The intent of sanctions is to create unrest in the country, and unrest to the point where people are so fed up by their living situation, their lack of medical supplies, their lack of food, their lack of fuel. They're so fed up with the situation in the country that they will overthrow the government. That is the entire point of sanctions, right? But some people on the left have this fairy tale ideal of what they think sanctions are, and that, oh, I support sanctions. And this is another part. There's some people who just straight up want to devastate the Russian economy. But then there are other people like Kyle Kalinske who are making the similar point. Oh, we need to destabilize, and Crystal Ball and other clowns, Cenk Uygur, Sam Cedar, all those people, David Pagman. So we need to sanction them. I don't really support sanctions on. I don't want to harm the average citizens in Russia, but let's sanction the oligarchs. Let's sanction the people in charge to send a message and make life hard on them. That is never how sanctions have ever worked ever in the history of ever. And look at what they do in Venezuela. Look at what they do in Iran. Look at what they do in Cuba. Look what they do anywhere around the world you pick. When we do sanctions, it devastates the entire economy. And even if they don't at the moment, they will. They will. And once you agree to, and this is why I think that it's incredibly important to have a united front against the sanctions, period, is because once you agree to the premise that the US and NATO countries like Germany and France and Italy, who regularly engage in violating international law and violating country sovereignty and engaging in imperialism and endless war and genocide for profit. Once you agree to the premise that those people even have the right to put sanctions on any other country for violating international law to a much lesser extent than what they are guilty of, once you agree to that premise, okay, it's a much harder to push back once they go farther than what you think is acceptable. So you say in you like those fairy tale sanctions that only target Putin and Putin specifically, right? Okay, so now you have to instead of just having a firm stance against the sanctions on principle, now you're arguing about minutia, about exactly how far the sanctions should go and things like that, which is completely ridiculous in my opinion, because we all know where this is going to go, and it's happened already. The Russian economy is devastated. The ruble, the Russian dollar, dropped like 30% in a day. So their bank runs, the economy is imploding. Certain banks, certain major banks in Russia have been completely cut off and shut down. There've been sanctions put on Russian central bank, which has never happened ever to a major country. Sanctions on the Central Russian bank. So this is going to have devastating effects. This is going to lead to fuel shortages in Russia. This is going to lead to food shortages in Russia. This is going to lead to shortages of medical supplies. And this is going to lead to, like Rania Kolick has talked about when she speaks about sanctions, and she's one of my favorite people independent journalists. One of my favorite independent journalists on this issue of sanctions, because not only does she have a first-hand effect of it, but she also speaks to many other people in regions that have been affected by sanctions, and she paints a very clear picture, vivid picture of what these sanctions do to a population. And so another thing that these sanctions are going to do inevitably is going to lead to the professional class in Russia to flee. So that means the doctors and the lawyers and the engineers and the teachers, the professions that are necessary to have a functioning society. Did I say doctors already? They're going to see that the situation is bleak and dire and catastrophic. So the people, and they have the resources to leave the country if they want to, then they'll leave the country. So these sanctions are going to have a brutal, arguably unprecedented effect on Russian citizens, as was predicted from the beginning, which is why I was always against the sanctions. So the sanctions have already devastated the Russian economy. And so these are acts of war. These are acts of war. Economic warfare is another form of warfare. It will kill people like warfare will kill people. Like conventional warfare will kill people. It will destabilize the country similar to how conventional warfare will destabilize the country. So when you take that and then just straight up arming Ukrainians with our weapons, tanks, missiles, assault rifles, and things like that, What that means is we're actively taking a side in a war against Russia. We're destabilizing Russia's country as if we were at war with them, and we're providing the weapons and the equipment to kill Russian soldiers. So this is what people need to do here, especially if you're trying to avoid nuclear catastrophe. You need to put yourselves in the mind of Vladimir Putin. So now NATO and the US are fully committed to killing Russian soldiers in Ukraine and fully committed to destroying Russian economy and destabilizing the country. So now, like I said, they'll view you as a literal hostile enemy conducting warfare against them. So that means they're going to retaliate. And it isn't going to be like a slight snub. It's not going to be like, oh, we're going to fly some fighter jets up to your border just to like antagonize you or something like that. Because this wasn't a small thing that we've done. We've destroyed their economy. It's not like, oh, yeah, we were going to have a G7, but we don't like how Putin's acting, so we're just not going to invite him to the meeting. We're just going to like make it a G6 or something like that. This is serious. This is warfare level actions that we're taking against them. So he's going to respond in kind. And this is what I've been trying to avoid. They have the capabilities to disrupt the entire like the fuel economy in Russia. I mean in Europe. They have the ability to disrupt really global economy. They have the cyber capabilities to do massive cyber attacks to put critical infrastructure offline or to take major corporations offline. They have the ability to do those things. They have the ability to strike other NATO countries or just straight up invade them. They have the capability to do those things. They have the capability to attack U.S. troops in certain areas of the world and kill them because now we're in war. So all of those things would then invite a response from the U.S., and it will be even more drastic than the sanctions that we've put on them. So this is why, from the beginning, the only position that makes sense is de-escalation. And anybody who is so certain that we will be able to precisely conduct economic warfare and straight up fund the murdering of Russian soldiers, will be able to walk that fine line so perfectly that they can assure you that there will be no nuclear exchange. They're fucking lying to you. Nobody can say that for certain. And with so much on the line, the only position that makes sense is to de-escalate. Because then what's the end goal? Or else, what is the end goal? You put the sanctions on them, you destroy the Russian economy. What do you think is going to happen? What did you think would happen? You want to give weapons and all this equipment, billions of dollars of equipment, which is being promised to Ukraine at this point, so that they can kill Russian soldiers. What do you think would happen? So this punitive, oh, we got to go get the bad guys. Oh, we can't let this stand. What do you think is going to happen? And another point I want to make about the just complete absurdity. So again, here in the U.S., we're occupying and dropping bombs in countries around the world. We have military bases in over 100 countries around the world. We are the empire occupying other countries around the world. And honestly, I have a hard time believing that people, especially, this makes me, it pissing me off even more, people on the left who understand the reaches of U.S. imperialism and how unchecked it's been this entire time. And the U.S. and our allies, we invade and occupy wherever we want, wherever we feel like Palestine, for example. You mean to tell me that my position is let whatever happens in Ukraine, let it happen. and it looks like Russia's going to take Ukraine, and there's almost nothing nobody can do about it. They're going to take Ukraine. But if your position is we can't let that happen because something Hitler, and we let him do it there, he's going to take over the entire world. It is completely, you're leaving out the context of who is currently the occupiers around the world. Who, if we want to look at everything through the World War II context, who would be the most likely replacement for the Nazi regime? That would be the U.S. and our allies. And the endless genocide and destruction we're bringing about around the world. So if you mean to tell me, we can't let it slide this one time because Russia might be turned into Hitler, okay, you can easily flip that argument. Okay, we can't let the U.S. invade Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and then help occupy Palestine and Yemen and Somalia and Sudan. We can't let the U.S. do all of that because they're going to turn into Hitler. You can easily flip that argument, and it's a way more convincing argument the other way. So we should do nothing. It's sad to say because there's a bunch of people in Ukraine dying, but honestly, us getting involved is just going to kill even more people in Ukraine because they can't hold out forever. They can't hold out that much longer against the Russian military. It's just impossible. But if you flood the zone with weapons, it's not going to make it so that they win and repel Russia. It just means a lot more people are going to die, and it's going to be a lot longer. So that's my take on it, and my take on the overall response to this invasion from Russia into Ukraine.